Well, good morning. Hope you're all well and bearing up and adjusting to life as it currently is. Today, directing the show behind the PCs over there is my daughter Jessie and my son Jack. Again, short on children this morning. Maybe we need to move the show back so they can all get up a little bit. In the show today, we have Dr. Dan Maggs. We're going to really be diving in deep to look at carbohydrates and sugar. And there he is, there's Dr. Dan. he called me the other day from his rounds and I quickly screen grabbed Dr. Dan. Bless him. He's got some great stories, well not great stories, but some stories to tell us about what's happening on the front line, but also his whole journey in learning about carbohydrates and beating his own obesity. And then throughout the show, we've got so many things happening. If you are new to us, welcome. Nice to have you on board. My name's Steve Bennett, your host at the Food Bank Show. We have three aims. One is, how do we take advantage of the fact that the McDonald's, the Greggs, the Subways, etc., all closed at the moment, and the restaurants are all closed? How do we take advantage of that? How do we learn about food? Take this time to really understand the food we eat to bolster our defense mechanism, because after keeping our social distancing and washing our hands, the bit you and I can control is that which we stick into our body, the food that we digest, and we really can make a huge difference to bolstering our immune system and helping to make sure we minimize the effects of COVID-19. Secondly, our big purpose is to raise money for the food banks across the UK, who more than ever have got a huge demand at the moment, and the Trussell Trust run 1,200 of those food banks. So really everything we can do right now to support the food banks in terms of more donations, which we'll talk about throughout the show, and financially support them via Just Giving. We're now over £10,000 so far with your help, so thank you very, very much to everybody that's contributed. Remember, today's show is all about being as interactive as possible, so if you can give us questions on YouTube as we go through, questions for myself, questions for Dr. Dan when we speak to Dan in a moment, that would be fantastic. Remember, the third thing we're looking at is there must be some positives. We know this thing is hard for everybody. We're all a little bit stressed. We're all very obviously anxious. We've all changed what we'd be doing at the moment, changing our work life, financial stress. It's undoubtedly very difficult at the moment. But let's try and not follow everybody else in thinking just of the negatives. Let's work out what positives we might get from COVID-19. What could life look like post the event? May it help slow down global warming? May it change our communities? May it change our diet, our health, our longevity, our well-being? Let's just really focus on what we can control and how we try and find some positives at these real difficult times. Now, those that have been watching other shows will know that we do a few things every day. First thing is we do something called a food fact. And what we're saying is, if you can just write down what the food facts are each day, you'll see a big green box come up on your screen. Don't need to write the details, but what was the food we were talking about? And then at the end of this, when the show's over, when we come out of what we call our health bunker here, and when we're back to normality, we'll pick a winner who's got the most words written down. And if it's a tie, we'll find a way of picking a winner. And we're going to give £1,000 worth of free jewellery, courtesy of Gemporia. Or if you prefer, come and stay in a boutique hotel in Warwickshire, and my kids and I and the show producers, Nick and Poppy, will take you out for a nice big meal on that Saturday evening. You choose which one you prefer. So the food fact for today is cauliflower. And the reason I've chosen cauliflower for today is my family, we think it's the single best way to bust and to carb dodge. Because we can use cauliflower for so many different things. It's like the most flexible thing that you can ever buy to carb dodge. In fact, kids, what have we had in the last week or so with cauliflower in it? I think we've cooked with cauliflower every night, whether you realised it or not.
We've had pizza base that we put on the show.
Yeah, pizza base.
Cauliflower in a roast.
So cauliflower with a roast as opposed to
The lamb last night, yep.
We had it on cottage pie, on the
Yeah.
top of the cottage
So we replaced the potato and the cottage pie for cauliflower
I
mash.
think our favourite thing to do is to make cauliflower rice and have it with anything you'd have rice with. So Thai green curry, normal curry, literally anything.
What about Dr. Dan, who's on later? His paella is carb-free paella.
That's good.
So cauliflower, we can use it to replace potatoes in mash. We use it for the base in pizza. In fact, that's something we did last night. First time we've ever done an anchovy pizza. But rather than having dough and carbohydrates, we just took some cauliflower, we diced it up, we got some almond flour, a few eggs and a bit of cheese. We made a base that, if you didn't know, you would think that that was your regular pizza base. So cauliflower is amazing. It's also full of fiber. Also, when you talk about the 13 vitamins and the 14 minerals we're supposed to consume every single day to be healthy, well, cauliflower's pretty much got them all. It's also a great source of fiber. It's great for fighting off inflammation. It's got full of antioxidants. It is an amazing, amazing food. You need to find ways to get cauliflower into your life. Honestly, just go and look. And by the way, if you go to Primal Living, we've now taken our entire cookbook, which I don't seem to have around today. We've taken our entire cookbook and put every single recipe free of charge on our website to try and help you get inspired with cooking. And also at Primal Living on Instagram, we're putting up new ideas for healthy meals every single day. So that's one competition. What's the other competition? Well, that is to guess how much sugar, things that you and I in the past would have taken for granted, be part of our stable diet. We're trying to guess how much sugar is in certain food types. So yesterday, I asked about the sandwich. By the way, why has Mr. Bennett got a sandwich? It is rubber, before anybody thinks I've gone and made a sandwich. It is nothing more than fake. Bit like a lot of news, especially in America. Anyway, that's a fake sandwich. We asked you to guess how much sugar bread turns into once digested. Well, the easy way to remember this, per slice. So if you're having 2 sandwiches or 2 slices, per slice. This is the answer. Per slice of bread, doesn't matter whether it's brown bread or white bread, maybe a slight few benefits with brown bread in terms of its nutritional value, but it's still the same. It turns down to 3 sugar cubes per slice. So if you're having a sandwich, that's the effect of 6 sugar cubes of sugar, the equivalent effect on the blood glucose level of having 6 spoons of sugar. And who would want to have 6 spoons of sugar inside of a cup of coffee or a cup of tea? You just wouldn't do it, would you? Take a Subway, for example, that 12-inch Subway. That is 150 grams of bread. That turns into 15 sugar cubes inside the bloodstream. Isn't that frightening? Isn't that absolutely frightening? So you need to find ways to replace the bread. You need to find ways to replace the pasta, the rice, and the potatoes. So that's what we're going to really focus on in today's show. Before we do all of that, though, remember what it's all about. If you can make a donation, we're saying 2 things. Let's change what's in our pantry. So if in your pantry right now you have got rice, if you have got pasta, if you have got any biscuits or UHT milk or orange juice or apple juice in a carton, if you could take that and drop that off at your local supermarket in the food collection box, because there's a huge difference about us helping you to get to optimal nutrition and people that are really, really hungry. What I would recommend to you for optimal nutrition, it's very different to what we'd recommend if somebody's got no food at all. So these are the sort of foods here that food banks want us to donate into those food banks. Giving the food is one bit, but also at the moment, they are so strapped for cash because they're having to do deliveries to homes simply because at the moment, they can't have the face-to-face interaction that the food banks would normally have. So if you could text a donation, dead simple, text to number 70450 and then type in the word Primal if you want to give £2, and then 2 if you want £2, Primal £10 and so on. Or simply head over to Just Giving while we're on the show today, and if you can make a donation, that would be fantastic. Shall we, Jack, go and play a little quick film for the Trust of Trust? Yeah, Jack's already. He's on it this morning, Monday morning.
When you have to go without everyday things, food, hot water, heating. That's really, it's a really hard way to have to live, really. And that's devastating for most people. Started to make a lot of mistakes at work, and they suggested that I see a doctor, who diagnosed me with, at that time, work-related stress.
I unfortunately took 2 TIA strokes. I did spend a time in hospital to come out to discover that I couldn't go back to my work.
Worked all my life, army, sales, when my health deteriorated with a heart condition. Then my married life deteriorated as well.
After a period of time, they decided it wouldn't be viable for me to return to that kind of work because I couldn't handle the pressure of it, so it led me into the benefit system.
We just started to struggle. Things started to get quite sort of dramatic, and things were just starting to get on top of me because I just wasn't doing what I should have been doing as a mother.
I do have a 10-year-old daughter as well, so I do try and provide for her as well, which makes it more difficult, but it's a case of trying to budget or having to go without. I think if the food bank had not been there to keep me going, I don't think I'd be here today.
No, I'm not needing the food bank anymore, but I'm glad it was there when I needed the help.
To find out that there is places there that can help you with food and other things, it's an amazing thing to have put in front of you.
Now, the other day we talked about how all food breaks down into carbohydrates, into fat, or into protein, and that means all food. But we're going to take that one step further today. So, and by the way, I'm totally dyslexic, so there are bound to be some spelling mistakes. We're going to call carbohydrates just carbs, and I have an acronym for that. I'll call it carbs are really bad sugars, protein, and fat. Remember the other day I said the problem really isn't just so much carbs, because we do get carbs in, say, green vegetables, and they're okay. So we need some carbs. We're not saying no carbs, otherwise you couldn't have green vegetables. But remember what we said the other day, that if what you're eating once had a face on it, then that only has protein and fat in it. That's if it had a face. So that was a fish, or that was I'm not very good at drawing. That's a fish or a cow or sorry, it's a face. It's a head. Look, it's a face. Okay, it's a sheep. There we go. It's a sheep. If what you're eating didn't have a face on it, so it was a plant, a vegetable, or a fruit, then that is just protein and carbs. Notice how protein is in everything. So protein, what does that break down into? Well, protein breaks down, right, in something called amino acids, and they're good for us. They are the building blocks of life. That's why we have protein in everything. That rebuilds our cells. Remember, our body is constant, with the exception of probably parts of our brain, our eyes, and our teeth. We're constantly in renewal. We have a new skeleton every so many years. We have a new heart, we have new lungs, we have new everything, we have new skin. So we're constantly in repair. And as I say, in the computer world, garbage in, garbage out. They call it GIGO. So if we're eating all the wrong foods, we're building bad body parts. And really that's what the aging process is that every time we replace something, if we're not replacing it with as good bits, then we start to have a problem. Now, fat breaks down into something called fatty acids. And as long as the fats you are eating are natural, forget all this complicated stuff about is it saturated, is it polyunsaturated, is it monounsaturated. It's a complete nonsense, right? It's complete. Somebody's taken us completely looking at the wrong things because they're disguising the damage of sugar. We don't care whether the fat is saturated, unsaturated, polyunsaturated, mono. It just does not matter. The only thing that matters with fat is it real fat or fake fat? Because if it's real fat from your avocados, from your coconuts, from your meat fats, from your omegas, they're all good fats. The bad fats are those that are manufactured and sadly hydrogenated and all those things, like margarine was so dangerous in the 80s and the 90s, wasn't it? So all you want to worry about is fats. Is it real or not? Now, carbs inside the body. So protein breaks down to amino acid, fat breaks down to fatty acids. All carbohydrates break down into sugar. All of it. Now you hear things like, what type of sugar is it? What type of carbs is it? Is it refined? Are they slow releasing carbs? And all those things are kind of relevant, how quickly they turn into sugar. That's why we have something called the glycemic index. How quickly it turns into sugar don't sort of dictate whether they're bad for us, really, really bad, or completely dangerous. But don't mince your words, don't get confused. All carbs will turn into sugar. The question is, what type of sugar? Now, there's several types of sugar, but the two we really want to think about is glucose, glucose, and fructose. But before I go into that, I have a really good friend who's written so many great books. In fact, he's had 9 million people like his video on YouTube, and he explains fructose way better than I will. Let me introduce you to the incredible Dr. Robert Lustig.
Fructose, that other molecule in sugar, the one bound to it, it is very sweet. It's the reason we like sugar. It's the reason we crave sugar, because it is addictive. It goes to that reward center and activates it. Glucose does not. So fructose is the addictive component of sugar. Turns out fructose is completely vestigial to all animal life. It is a holdover from our plant ancestors. It is how plants stored energy. That's why fruit has sugar in it. And for plants, it's probably fine. For us, we have a limited capacity to metabolize it. Our livers have to metabolize it because fructose does not enter any other cell, because it doesn't have, the other cells don't have that transporter. So basically, when you take a fructose load, like a Coca-Cola, basically it's all going to your liver. And the liver gets overwhelmed. The liver has an innate capacity to metabolize fructose, that's true, but it's fixed. There are a few things you can do to manipulate it, like exercise will up your capacity to metabolize it. But basically it's fixed. And if you overwhelm your liver's capacity to metabolize the fructose, the liver doesn't know what to do with the rest because it's fixed. So what happens is the liver will turn that extra fructose into fat. And that's the process you were referring to called de novo lipogenesis, new fat making. And then that fat has one of two fates. It can either be exported out of the liver, in which case now you've got the substrate for obesity and for heart disease, or it will precipitate in the liver, not make it out of the liver. Now you've got a lipid droplet. Now you've got that fatty liver disease I was talking about earlier. And now you have liver dysfunction, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome.
That was the brilliant Dr. Robert Lustig. His book is a real must-read for everybody. It's called Hacking the American Mind, but really it's hacking the mind of anybody. The corporates have hacked, so it's all about how they play on happy meals and happy hours and really how it's all completely corrupt and why we've got completely our health back to front since the modernization of food and that we eat and drink. We have the brilliant Dr. Dan Maggs. Dan, how are you, my friend?
Yeah, really good, thank you, Steve. Sorry about my appearance. Just got out of the shower, just done an at-home workout.
Good man. What did that include this morning?
It included quite a lot of squats, quite a lot of lunges, jumping jacks, which are harder than you think they are going to be. They look easy, Steve, but when you've done 30 of them 3 times, it's a little bit harder. And just some work with the kettlebell. So really happy that my gym is still keeping going. just in an online way at the moment, and it's really good to be working out with some of my friends still, even during these difficult times. So yeah, really good.
And you're working out sort of online, are you? So you're all sort of in a session together?
Yeah, we're just jumping on a Zoom call all together. Just put it on the iPad out in the garden, and everybody's out there just chatting away, just like a normal kind of class really that I do, but just without the social contact, Steve. So yeah, really good, really enjoying it.
It's going to be interesting to see how that all changes post-COVID as well, isn't it? So I want to go right back to the beginning. We've had you on before, but I don't think I really covered your story. And I'm going to start it by saying, and I hope you don't cut me off, as in turn your camera off, but Dan, believe it or not, looking at him right now, was, as I was, obese for quite a few years. He was in a ski lodge skiing while he was obese, and saw somebody in the lodge putting butter in coffee, and Dan, being a doctor, went over and questioned what the gentleman was doing. Expand, Dr. Dan Maggs.
Yeah, okay, so it was a bit of a, if I go into the story in a bit more detail, okay, I had heard of something called Bulletproof Coffee, okay, which is basically putting butter in coffee. You can put a little bit of coconut oil or something similar in there as well. But I was a bit confused about what this guy was doing, okay? I'd heard about it. There's a guy called Dave Asprey. I'm sure you must have read some of his books or be aware of this guy. And he popularized the idea of bulletproof coffee, and in fact branded it. Bulletproof Coffee is his brand a few years ago. But this was the first time I'd actually seen somebody in the flesh spooning butter into their coffee. And I tried these low carb diets before and got twitchy with it because of the amount of saturated fat in there and what it was going to go do to my cholesterol, and eating all this meat and all this butter and all that kind of stuff, and getting a little bit worried about it. So actually seeing this guy there actually doing it, I was like, what are you doing? But me being naturally curious, and I'm so glad I am, Steve, because otherwise I wouldn't be where I am today, had to ask some questions of this guy. And yeah, we sat down over the course of that week, just in the evenings when you're sitting around chatting and stuff when the skiing day is over. And he explained to me all about why why obesity is a hormonal problem rather than a problem of energy in and energy out. Okay, just completely changed my understanding, made a lot of sense to me. And all of a sudden, the way was open. Okay, the path which I thought was previously closed off, because I'd tried it before, Steve. I'd been on plenty of diets in my time, and I'd pretty much given up. Okay, I tried to lose weight for my wedding, there's me managing to lose about 5 or 6 kilograms. My wife looking absolutely fantastic, as she always does, but me still. I'd managed to lose a bit of weight, but not a huge amount of weight. So yeah, I'd pretty much given up on the idea that I could really lose that weight. And then all of a sudden, this pathway was open. And within 6 months, I'd reversed my obesity, and I've continued that ever since, really.
And I don't know if that's envisioned there, but there's you, wrong side. There's you as you was when you're a little bit overweight, and as you are now, in fact. And there's me on the page before, exactly the same, very obese. And then what happens when you realize that fat's your friend, not your enemy, and actually carbohydrates, in particular sugar, is actually the thing that makes us put on weight. And you're right, it's all about hormones, which I'm sure you're going to cover off in a bit more detail. So you're there, you see him putting the butter in the coffee, you decide to make a change. So you got back home to the UK. What was the first few steps that you did then to say, right, I'm going to do something different here?
So I can't remember the exact details, but I think I was looking around the internet for some low carb recipes, and I just kept it really, really simple, Steve. I was working like 4 or 5 days a week in a GP surgery at the time. So I just cook up a tray of chicken thighs on a Sunday afternoon, put a nice bit of, shaking spice things on there. And I'd probably have a couple of those, some spinach, maybe a bit of cheese in there, and some basic balsamic vinegar dressing that I'd make at home. And that would be my lunch. I I would drink the Bulletproof coffee in the mornings as well, but very quickly I found myself not needing that anymore. So yeah.
So that's, can I just stop it there? Because that's a really good point, isn't it? Because I'm the same as you. I don't do those anymore, but I needed to when I first decided to go low carb, because my body was still craving carbohydrates, still craving sugar, still wanted the cereals in the morning, still wanted the bread in the morning. And therefore, back then, before I got into being a fat burner, that was one of the first things I did as well. I didn't use the butter, I used the coconut and the coconut milk, and I used to, or a big lump of coconut oil straight into the coffee. And that, because great thing with coconut as well, it's MCT, so it's a medium chain triglyceride. So it gives you that energy hit really, really quickly. But it's interesting how you say you don't need to do that anymore now that you're sort of a fat burning machine.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this is one of the things I see a lot of people, they try and make these lifestyle changes all at once. They'll suddenly run out and start exercising, they'll start fasting, they'll start the low carb diet. And you know what happens when people try to do too many things at once? It just doesn't work. So when I teach it to people, the way I teach it through my courses and stuff, Steve, is that I say, right, first of all, you can either have a normal breakfast replacement, a low carb breakfast replacement, or a bulletproof coffee. But I don't want you to necessarily be jumping straight into intermittent fasting. Between 4, 6, sometimes 8 weeks, people start to naturally find their hunger in the morning tails off.
Such good advice, Dan.
At that point, it is a case of, right, listen to your body, okay? Don't try and force the issue. You don't need to. You will many people naturally fall into a pattern of what we call 16-8 fasting, which is missing breakfast in the mornings and going on and just having lunch time. And then, so you're having this big, long 16-hour fasted window where your insulin levels are low, your blood glucose levels are normalized, and you're able to burn your own fat for fuel at that point. And your energy levels start to pick up and you become what we call fat adapted. And that's really where the magic starts to happen. Because I know for me, it was about 6 to 8 weeks, I realized something was different. I was losing loads of weight, more than I'd ever done before. And crucially, around 6 weeks, I felt different, okay? Because 6 weeks before was about the tipping point where I'd fall off a diet. And this time it was different. I felt like energized. I knew I was working with my body rather than against it. Rather than starving my body, I was feeding my body, but still giving it the hormonal profile it needed to actually lose that weight. And that was amazing, Steve. That's the point I aim to get people to in my courses. Can I just
stop you there? Because you've just said that better than I've ever said it. You've said it better than I've ever written it. Because I always say you can't start to fast until you cut down the carbohydrates, because while you're craving carbs, life will be misery. And actually, you can never beat hunger. You've just got to teach that ghrelin, the hormone that gives us hunger. You've got to teach them to go away. But you just said it brilliantly in that, don't even think about fasting. You will fall into it. And that actually is the best advice I've ever heard, because you will fall into it naturally. Once you turn your body into a fat burning machine, you just go, oh, crikey, I skipped a meal there, because actually you're now consuming your own body fat without even realizing it.
Yeah, and you naturally stop snacking. You don't feel the need to snack. Hunger just doesn't come into your brain anymore, and that's the really cool thing about it. And so it almost creeps up on you. You're like, hang on a second, I'm just not hungry. And this is one of the features we see. I was hungry all the time, Steve.
Yep.
I know certain breakfast cereals say they will keep your hunger locked up until lunch. That never happened for me, okay, Steve? And I just ate, all right, I must not be eating as much of that. Those portions must be for a smaller person, okay? So I'll have that. Yeah. And, the portion sizes on the back of the cereal packets, 30 grams. We've done this. I know we've done this because we've done it on your TV shows before,
I'm trying
Steve.
to look for some cereals. It's just nothing.
30 grams of cereal. It's like a handful. Like, honestly, I can't fill myself up on 30 grams of cereal.
In fact, I can just stop you there, Jack. There is a graphic for cornflakes, because we actually measured Tom. So Tom's only 12 years old. And so you'd say, well, he's probably, if 30 grams is right for anybody, it's probably a 12-year-old. We've got a graphic. We measured his bowls. On average, it was 80 grams. So it was almost 3 times that much.
Oh, easily.
So if you look at a 30-gram portion, that's 8 cubes of sugar. But if you look at what Tom, who's 12 years old, was eating, and he's not, not a big lad, he was eating 80 grams. That's the equivalent on your blood sugar level, your glucose level, of sitting there and eating 22 cubes of sugar.
Yeah.
Scary. Scary. No wonder then you crash, because insulin's gone crazy. It's gone to save your life. It grabs that sugar, it stores it, and now you want an even bigger snack at 11 o'clock.
Exactly. But thankfully, Steve, those nice people at the cereal manufacturers around that time were starting to produce these lovely brunch bars. So, that'll get you through till lunch. So it's all good. It's all good. All right. Yeah. Well, there's always some biscuits, of course.
Yeah. Same. For those that don't know, there are only literally 10 companies around the world that pretty much, other than real food, as in your cauliflowers and things like that, but other than real food, there's only 10 companies that control the entire food industry. So if they can fill you up with your cereal in the morning, then get your snacking at lunchtime, and hope that at school they just give you a jacket potato, because they know that'll keep you on that carb coaster all the way till they poison you again in the evening. Anyway, sorry, Dan, over to you.
No, absolutely. And you don't feel like you're hungry mid-afternoon. That energy level I had during the mid-afternoon. So this is the big benefit for my patients is, and a lot of people, I know David's talked about this, David Unwin's talked about this big crash that people get in the mid-afternoon, feeling absolutely exhausted. And you go off and you run and you try and get coffee, but that's not enough. You have to have some biscuits with us. And you could very often see me scurrying around the kitchen in the GP surgery at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, trying to find out if there was any biscuits left in there, and you're just hopping from meal to snack to meal to snack to meal to snack, and just feeling hungry all the time. And one of these features that happens at about 6 to 8 weeks after switching to a low carbohydrate diet, and there is a transition period. You have to stick with it. You have to be diligent. You have to be committed to it for a few weeks, but the payoff is absolutely fantastic and huge. And this is where I believe that this is what our ancestors used to feel like, okay? They wouldn't be chasing out for meals all the time. And, and we see in kind of primitive cultures, whatever the cultures and stuff that are still exist around the world that haven't gone through the development that we have, they will go have one meal a day, one meal every few days, and eat huge amounts of meat and fat and drinking blood and milk and all these kind of things. So actually, I think that's more how we've evolved to live than how we are at the moment. And I think our health is being the detrimental effects on our health are huge.
Yeah, so if you take up the two saying, isn't it? Eat little but often, wrong, just good for the snacking companies. Feast and famine, well, that's actually what we're designed to do. And I was in the Himalayas just recently in a place in Nepal that I was looking for gemstones that they'd never, in these 3 mountains we went up, ever seen a foreigner. And they were doing exactly what you said. There would be most one meal a day. There'd be days without meals. But then crikey would go crazy. They would, it sounds horrible and barbaric, but they'd kill a goat in front of us. And that's all we'd eat that night was the goat. And then a couple of days later, somebody had got some, and it was carbohydrate based, but it was just the carbs that night. And therefore would all feast on that. So feast and famine is what we're designed for. Trouble is, and you just said it brilliantly a minute ago, you can't get to feast and famine while you're on this carb coaster, roller coaster type thing, but switch to maybe the silver bullet in the morning, the coffee with the butter in or with the coconut in, switch to fat. And before you know it, you find yourself skipping meals quite straightforward. Dan, we got loads of questions in. Should we turn to YouTube and find out what people are asking you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do that. So let's jump right to the very, very top. From Living, by the way, they just said, well done, we've raised £10,000 so far for the food bank, which is brilliant. Thank you to everybody. Barry says, which low carb foods are okay to eat in moderation at this time?
Which low carb foods or which any foods?
He says, which low carb foods are okay to all of them.
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
All of them.
I think you might watch which foods are okay to eat in moderation and stuff at this time, really. So if the question's which foods can we eat in moderation at this time, it's a difficult one because we are living in kind of strange times. I went to Sainsbury's this morning, Steve. Pretty well stocked, actually. Pretty well stocked. There's a few areas that are still not so well stocked, really, in terms of foods. People have been hammering the canned tin tomatoes and stuff at the moment, so they're really, really difficult. And a lot of my low carb staples are based around like ground beef or minced beef and things like that. So, your low carb cottage pies, your low carb shepherd's pies, your bologneses and things like this, just simple, easy, low carb dishes.
And just can I interrupt you there? Your shepherd's pie, we did it the other day with the kids. They loved it, mate.
That's good, isn't it?
Very, very nice, wasn't it, kids? Absolutely amazing. And we haven't mentioned yet, your website is www.carbdodging.com. So if anybody wants some recipe ideas, go and see Dan's website, which is absolutely amazing.
Carbdodging.com/recipes. You'll get to all the recipes and stuff there. So,
Thanks.
So
a few more questions. Leah says, apart from potatoes, why are carrots, parsnips, peas, butternut, squash, lentils on dietitians' no list, please? It depends which dietitian you talk to, Leah, but why does some dietitians suggest you shouldn't have those? It's an interesting question.
Honestly, I don't know about that because, to be honest, those are the foods that usually are on a dietitian's good list, okay?
Yeah.
In of themselves, that list is fairly nutrient-dense foods, okay? So the majority of those, your butternut, squash, that would probably be a little bit high for a stricter kind of ketogenic diet.
Although if you are going from potato mash and maybe you've just done cauliflower mash to death, then butternut squash I find is sort of a halfway house.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a really good food. It's really, great nutritious, really, really tasty. And so, it's a lot less carbohydrate load than a potato, for example. So that's a good option. Lentils, they are, if you're not wanting to go strictly on the low carb diet, lentils, they release the blood sugar, the sugar into your blood on a slower basis, same as beans and legumes. So they're another option, particularly for people, who are non-diabetic and metabolically healthy. They're not a bad option per se, but none of the things on that list really or anything that none of those are super high in carbohydrates.
No. And carrots, you have to have carrots in your diet, I'm afraid.
Carrots can be.
Full of so many good things.
Oh, that's a handsome looking website, isn't it?
It's not a great website. Yeah, look at that.
That looks really tasty, Steve.
Yeah, we should go and cook some of those. So that's for everybody. That's Dr. Dan's website there. Brilliant website. Luke Walsh says, are carbs like rice okay to have on the odd occasion, as you normally have it in the house and it lasts longer than cauliflower, which is usually the low carb alternative? Now, look, that's a really, really, really good question. So depends what you're trying to achieve, doesn't it, Dan? If you have got nothing else in the house other than rice, my advice is don't mix it with fat. Just have the rice with something else, believe it or not, that is also carbs, because it's when you mix the two together that we have a real problem. But if you can avoid it, Luke, just avoid it, because and the good thing at the moment, the bad thing really, is that in the supermarkets, I've not seen them yet run out of cauliflower. Certainly my local Sainsbury's, they've always got cauliflower in it, even right now. It seems to be all the other things that we don't promote that seem to be selling out.
Sprouts this morning, Steve. So, Luke, in order to answer, I'd like to have a little crack at that one. Steve.
Yeah, sure.
What I teach people is you have to look at where you are metabolically, okay? If you are someone who's trying to improve their diabetic control, like many people are, diabetes is a huge problem, pre-diabetic, then that's your focus, okay? You definitely don't want to be having the carbohydrates. You can freeze cauliflower as well. So that's absolutely something you can do. You can freeze cauliflower rice. I do that in portions so that I've always got some on hand, because you're right, it doesn't always hang around. And this is one of the problems, like when we're having to shop, a lot of us are choosing to shop only once a week. By the end of the week, fresh vegetables are getting a little bit more sparse. If you're a metabolically healthy person who does a huge amount of exercise, then having some carbohydrates on an occasional basis is not going to do you too much harm, okay? Insulin is a hormone that should be pulsatile. It should shoot up, drop back down, exert its effects on the body. It's when we have persistently raised levels of blood glucose, persistently raise levels of insulin within the bloodstream, that we get these metabolic problems. We develop metabolic syndrome, we develop insulin resistance, and all of the bad stuff that goes along with type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, fatty livers involved in there, high blood pressures involved in there. So it really depends on your starting point, Steve. Where you are, you know, like thankfully I was never diabetic. I was obese, but I was never diabetic. Okay. I've now, you know, done about 3 years of pretty good, intense, high intensity exercise, built my muscle mass up, and I respond very well to carbohydrates now. I don't, you know, I get my body responds very well to them. They come back down to a normal level pretty rapidly. Okay.
Isn't that interesting, Dan? Why does your body do that and not mine? So I'm like you, we both train similar sort of exercise regime, similar sort of frequency, and yet you metabolically can deal with the odd rice. As I know when we were skiing together recently, Mr. Carb Dodging had one meal with carbs, you know, but you were fine with it. Whereas we were doing intense exercise. But if I look at a bowl of rice, I put weight on it. I don't know.
I'm not talking about the weight, Steve. I mean, okay. I'm largely unconcerned with my weight at this point. Okay, gotcha. 3 years down the line, I'm not so bothered about my weight. But talking about a long-term keeping myself long-term and metabolically healthy, okay?
Yeah.
Doing lots of exercise. What I'd like to see, Steve, and we should do these tests at the moment, we should get the continuous blood glucose monitoring kits and actually test your response to what the, you know, carbohydrates would be. Okay. So, and I suspect, given the amount of training that you do, and I know you do lots of training and the right kinds of training, you're not out there running marathons anymore. Thank goodness. No. Thank goodness for your knees, Steve. But, you know, you're doing plenty of strength training, high intensity exercises. You do some sprinting and stuff like that. Then I expect your, you know, your ability to metabolize carbohydrates is better than it would have been 3 or 4 years ago. We probably won't have that data. Of course, we won't have that data, but probably much better. And so having an occasional spike of carbohydrates for you as someone who's non-diabetic is it's probably not going to be a terrible thing. So to Luke, you know, having that in the, but I completely agree with you. Don't mix the carbs and the fat. Yeah. Okay, have carbs and protein as a meal, or fat and protein as a meal. And I'm sorry if that muddies the water for people. I'd love to boil it down to just the real simple, like eat less, move more. And that's why eat less, move more is so popular as an idea.
But it's just flawed.
It's flawed, but it's simple. Okay, and you know, there's one quote that I really like is that. For every human problem, there is a simple answer, neat, plausible, but unfortunately wrong. Definitely the eat less, move more is very simple, it's very neat, very plausible, but is definitely incorrect.
Thank you. Now, that's loads more questions for you, Dan, here. Heather says, worth noting that Dr. Unwit's sugar info for bread is for a small 30-gram slice. The sorts of sandwiches we buy are made with larger slices, even more sugar, and she's absolutely right. So Dr. David Unwin will tell you that for every slice of bread, but we have to, you know, err on the side of not getting sued, that will turn into 3 cubes per small slice. We did that research recently. You're absolutely right there, Heather, that a Subway at 12 inches turns into 15 cubes of sugar. So you're right, the charts that we keep showing for sugar are based on smaller portion sizes. Nick says, where and when did the belief of fat being bad for us come from?
Right, yeah. This is a really interesting
to Mr. Ansel Keys, I would have thought.
Yeah, we're going back into the 1970s, but actually way back before. It came after the Second World War in the States, okay? This is my understanding of it. Back in there was a lot of people, they were starting to research heart disease at that time in the United States. A lot of people come back after the war. People weren't dying of the war, thankfully, and they were starting to be able to pick up heart disease. And so there was a lot of like, why are people having heart disease? Of course, they were having more heart disease because they were actually reporting more heart disease, okay? People weren't suddenly dying of more heart disease than they were before. But then people started to get some wrong information. There was some pretty dodgy science going on at the time, which led people to believe that fat was associated with heart disease. Some studies being buried that were done at the time, some general misinformation, and you're right, the name Ansel Keys does come up in there a little bit, really. And so, yes, some studies, some bad science that was done. I know Zoe Harcum did her PhD was all about, was there any evidence for the introduction of the low-fat dietary guidelines at the time they were introduced in the 1970s? The answer to that, absolutely not. She then went on and looked at the studies that went after that and said, has there ever been any evidence that low-fat diet is a good diet? And the answer is absolutely not. So it comes back to post-war America, and the focus had gone away from the war, and they were trying to find out what was causing heart disease.
It's a great question there, Nick, and part of it is that belief that saturated fat inside the arteries causes heart disease, which it does. But if anybody that watched the clip earlier on with Robert Lustig, the saturated fat in the arteries that could cause heart disease doesn't come from that we eat from fat. It comes from delipogenesis, where we have too much fructose going in, and it either stays in the liver, which is dangerous, or gets turned into saturated fat. And therefore, and it was also very, very convenient then, wasn't it? Because all the big food giants, they don't particularly use a lot of fat in their product. They use a lot of carbohydrates. So if you can keep saying the bad guy's fat, while you're absolutely making billions and gazillions of cash out of processed foods and an onslaught of cheap carbohydrates that are cheap to produce, and then put some deadly oils in that aren't saturated but they're manufactured because they're cheap to manufacture, it's so convenient for big corporate that we all keep blaming saturated fat, while the villain, the sugar, got away with murder. So great question there, Nick. Nick also says, I drink alcohol and I eat sugar. Which of the two should I give up?
Actually, interestingly, so as Mr. Lustig was, Dr. Lustig was saying, is he professor? He might be Professor
He's
Lustig.
Professor,
I'm not sure.
I'll just check
Professor Lustig was saying earlier. He was saying earlier about the fructose. Okay, and depending on this gets a little bit complicated. Depending on your metabolic status, the glucose is either bad for you or not as bad as it. But fructose, that 50% of sugar, is very, very bad for us. We don't need it in our diets. The doses which we have it in sugar are very, very damaging to the liver, cause that accumulation of fat. The fat that doesn't get stored in the liver is implicated in developing heart disease. And alcohol follows a very similar pathway in the body to fructose, actually, okay, which is why we get non-alcoholic fatty liver disease from fructose consumptions. And Robert's done some of the best studies looking at this, okay, and showing that fructose causes fat accumulation within the liver, but glucose on its own doesn't. Okay, but alcohol has a very similar pathway, and that's why you get alcoholic fatty liver disease and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. They're just the same disease caused in a different way. Okay, so really, Nick, you just choose your poison.
Cut down on both, maybe. Chris, so it's Nick. Samuel says, is diet or exercise more important for weight loss? I'll have a quick crack at that one, and then what you've got. I say that it's 80% diet, 20% everything else. So you can't out-exercise a bad diet. You can't out-exercise your fork. So we're not saying don't exercise, because exercise is part of the sort of holistic well-being piece. But I'll give you an example. I was obese for 25 years and did way more exercise in those 25 years while I was obese than I do now, where I'm not obese and I don't exercise as much. Still exercise, but not as much. So my point is, first of all, because people, and that's where we've all got it wrong. People go, oh, well, that person's just lazy. They just sit on the sofa, they're just lazy. That's not the case. It's the putting on the weight that makes you lazy, that makes you lethargic, because you need all the energy you've got just to keep the heart going and the lungs going. So my point is, it's diet, optimal nutrition, and get that. And while you're changing what you eat, get out and walk more, but don't even think about anything else to start. A bit like you said earlier on, Dan, don't even think about intermittent fasting. You'll fall into it. It's almost the same with exercise. Get out and walk more, and then as the weight comes off, you'll find you're doing more exercise anyway.
Absolutely. And I always tell exactly the same as I tell people not to focus on intermittent fasting in the first few weeks of going on a low carbohydrate diet. I also say, don't focus on exercise, okay? Because a lot of people are going to go out and they, like everybody happens at New Year, they go on a diet, they start exercising, and a month later, they've forgotten about the whole thing, okay? So exactly the same way, I would say, focus on your diet. Diet is at least 80%. Completely agree with you, Steve. Focus on your diet. Focus first on what you eat, then focus on when you eat. And think of it as a long game, you can pick up the exercise down the route. I'm not saying sit and do nothing. Yes, move. By all means, movement is really, really important in those first few weeks. But I wouldn't recommend, and I don't recommend people start really focusing on an exercise habit. And exercise critically important. So good for our metabolic health. So good for so many other reasons. Absolutely recommend everybody who can physically do any exercise to be doing plenty of exercise, but focus on diet first and see how far diet can take you. And then you will realize once you've lost 6, 10, 15 kilograms without really doing any exercise, just how powerful diet is.
It's great advice, isn't it? Because I also felt that when all those years I was running marathons and I was obese and I was damaging my knees and damaging everything, that I would come back from the run and I'd have the sports drink, or I'd have the what we used to call their marathon, which I think is called Snickers now, or the other way around, and almost as a reward, but also because the body was craving energy then, because I was a sugar burning machine, so I just put a load of energy out. My brain only knew that sugar could fix the problem, even though it was sort of subconscious, if you like. And I used to find that actually now looking back and measuring everything, I would almost definitely take on more energy from what I was eating post-run than that I was doing in the run. So get into food first and keep walking, and then automatically you'll fall into more exercise, just like you'll fall into fasting afterwards, because you'll just want to do it. You'll have so much more energy. You'll find yourself just lifting things.
Yeah, and honestly, I forget about it. And you get so much more energy. You just can't sit still, actually. But yeah, no, I mean, like I said at the beginning, I've just trained. I haven't eaten this morning, and I'm genuinely not hungry. So I'll probably eat in a couple of hours or so, and again this evening. But yeah, just not hungry even after having exercised.
That's fantastic. Dr. Dan Maggs, you've been an absolute star. Thanks for all your advice today. Thanks for answering everybody's question. And again, as a doctor, to all doctors, all nurses, all care workers, you're doing an amazing, well, you always do an amazing job. But right
thanks,
now,
Steve.
more
Really
than ever, it's great actually that we've seen so much appreciation for the NHS. I love the clapping that everybody's doing on a Thursday, but really is.
And thank you for the message you put out on Twitter. That got loads of likes and reshares and stuff with me, the photo of me in the car on Saturday. Steve phoned me on Saturday to talk about today's show, and I was just about to go in and see a patient, fully gowned up, everything at the time. So there's a little snapshot of that. Yeah, there you go. And that was before I put my goggles on and stuff. So,
well, God bless you, man. Hopefully we can get you back on the show maybe next week.
Definitely, mate. Take care.
I look forward to physically seeing when this is all over.
Hopefully, hopefully soon.
Cheers, pal. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
That was the brilliant Dr. Dan Maggs. Now, we've talked a lot in today's show about converting from a sugar-burning machine into a fat-burning machine, and that's the only real way to sustain weight loss. I recently, this isn't live because it's middle of the night in America, but I recently spoke to Nina Teicholz. She's an investigative journalist, and she looked at where the whole thing went wrong with food. But I sort of extracted from that interview a little bit about what life is like in that first week or so when you make that decision to go low carbs.
When you convert over to being a fat burner, it's a little bit like you're becoming a hybrid car, right? And that is a complex thing for a human body to do. right? You're upregulating certain enzymes, you're downregulating other enzymes. You have to develop this whole new fuel source. You have to develop all the enzymes to be able to operate off this different fuel, which is fat. And you can, and why do you want to operate off of fat? Like what's the benefit of that? Well, I'll tell you the simplest benefit is when you become a fuel burner, you don't just operate off the fat you eat, you operate off the fat on your body when you're not eating. So, your body, fat on your body is not just a curse that, God gave you to like have a bad, teenage years or whatever. I mean, fat is a genius invention, so that it's like having granola bars strapped all over your body. You're like, oh, when I don't have food at my right here in front of me, I can just use some fat here. Here, I'm going to use this fat on my hip. And that is supposed to be your backup source of fuel. But you cannot access that fat on your body unless you know how to be a fat burner, unless your body knows how to burn fat. How do you do that? You have to reduce glucose, because glucose is the preferred fuel over here. As long as glucose is present, you're going to burn glucose. It's an easier, faster fuel. So you have to keep glucose low. That's why you have to reduce carbohydrates. Once you keep carbohydrates low for a while, your body will develop the ability to burn this alternate fuel source, which is fat. And that process takes a while. Right? That's why in many of the low carb diets like Atkins and some of the other ones, they say go super low on carbs, because you want to get through that process. It'll make that process happen faster. But it can, for people who are, metabolically unwell and who have had bad metabolisms for a long time, it can take a really long time. That process of transformation to becoming a hybrid car, that can take like over a month. It can take 6 weeks. It can really take a long time. And that process can be painful. You have headaches, you have dizziness, you have nausea, you don't feel good, you feel, it's like flu-like symptoms. They used to call it the Atkins flu. You can somewhat mitigate that by having a couple of cups of bone broth every day. And I don't mean you have to cook your own. You can take one of those little bouillon cubes and dissolve it into boiling water, and that's fine. Because part of your symptoms are caused by the loss of salts in your body. And so you have to go through that process. It's another reason why these short-term experiments that people are still doing are like, oh, I'm going to try it for 2 weeks and see how it does. And they go, I feel terrible. Well, yeah, you feel terrible. Your body's undergoing this huge transformation. It's probably the most you've asked your body to do, your whole life.
Well, it's kind of like giving up smoking or giving up drinking, isn't it? Even smokers will say that even though no smoking's bad for them, that first few weeks is hard, but once you get through, their life is blissful. Same
right.
with alcoholics. And
you get over to the other side.
Sugar is addictive. You've got to tell your body to stop craving it, and there are certain hormones and certain enzymes that will make you feel lousy for a while. But yeah, some people, depends how much they've messed it up. Exactly what you just said. If they've really messed up the metabolism in the past, could be a month. Others can get over it in a week. But the benefits, once you get to the other side, the good side, the grass is greener.
Yeah, I mean, people feel better and they lose a lot of weight, and they recover from all kinds of illnesses that they didn't even know were diet related. Like, who knew my sinus infections were related to my diet? I had no idea. But all of a sudden, those chronic sinus infections, for which I was taking antibiotics multiple times every winter, I haven't had one in many years now, knock on wood.
Earlier on, somebody asked the question about the history of how we start to screw up food. And if you want to know the whole story, we mentioned Ancel Keys earlier on, his misguided, in fact corrupt research. Get hold of Nina Teicholz's book. It's called The Big Fat Surprise. And in The Big Fat Surprise, she's an investigative journalist. She goes all the way back to the 20s and 30s, and then when it really started to go wrong, that advice in the 40s and 50s. And a guy called Ancel Keys, he's the bad guy. Read it. It's almost like a novel. You won't even believe the deceit, the destruction, the corruption that went on to end up in something that we have today, an Eat Well guideline that's just completely fraudulently wrong. Jack, have we had any customers? One of the things we ask you for at the moment is, what did you cook yesterday for the first time at home that's healthy? Now that all the fast food chains are closed at the moment and all of our restaurants are closed, we want to inspire you, and you inspire each other with new things that you're going to cook. We ask you to leave pictures and descriptions over on Facebook at Primal Living. And again, when we come out of COVID, we will pick a winner and offer £1,000 of free jewellery or a weekend stay in a boutique hotel, and we'll all come and have dinner with you. A healthy one, low carb, of course. So, Jack, what inspirations have we been getting off the web today?
To begin with, Patricia sent in a photo of some salmon.
Nice.
She's very right what she said. She said you can't go wrong with salmon, and it always looks good. And the next one we've got in is Steve with his first attempt at a pizza, sorry. And he said it looked starchy but tasted lush. Sausage meat base with loads of toppings. And then we've also got Helen with her butternut squash soup, which she said is delicious for a snack at lunchtime, which I must agree with. I'm a big fan of butternut squash soup. And then finally, Debbie has sent in this photo of her vegetable stir fry with chili and sesame seeds. I know that's one of your favourites. So.
That is one of mine. What great photography there.
Yeah, it's all very
impressive. Brilliant photography. Well done indeed. So if you can, tell everybody about this show, that we would greatly appreciate it. Right now, if you can hit the subscribe button below, if you haven't already done so, hit the little notification bell so we can remind you tomorrow morning about tomorrow's show. If you could, please share this with somebody. You know, if 2 people shared it with 2 people, and we'll get to the numbers we need so we can get to that £100,000 that we desperately need to raise for the food banks across the UK. If you can make a donation, that will be absolutely fantastic. Let me just read a few more quick questions. Tracy says, hi Dan and Steve, I now have, I know not to have potatoes I guess, but can't have a Sunday roast without roast potatoes, and are bean sprouts okay? So the bean sprout question, dead easy, they're fine. Bean sprouts, part of a primal diet, no problem at all. Potatoes, again, you know, we don't want to force anything on anybody right now, but if you're overweight, you want to lose weight, if you've got metabolic syndrome, if you've got diabetes, then cutting out potatoes, it can be a bit tricky. Here's what we do in our family. We have, and I have to write it down because I can never say it properly, but we replace our potatoes with celeriac. Did I say that right, kids? Yeah. I said it right for the first time ever. Yeah, celeriac. So we get celeriac. It's the ugliest looking vegetable in the supermarket. That's why you can always identify it. Just cut the skin off it. Slice it up. You can either slice it into chunks like you would with potatoes, or you can make chips out of it. And honestly, it's a real similar texture. It's a real similar taste to the potatoes. But of course, if for some reason you can't do without the spuds, just cut down the amount you have. Chris says, you can't lose weight to get healthy. You have to get healthy to lose weight. You can't lose weight to get healthy. You have to get, that's a really good point. What else we got there? You can't outrun a bad diet. That's a very good true. I think that was a comment regarding to diet or exercise, what's most important. Next question from Nicholas is a low carb diet safe for my 8-year-old? The answer is this: cut down the carbs. I've got 7 kids. My eldest children I poisoned for so many years with carb for breakfast, carbs for lunch, carbs for dinner, and they are void of nutrition. If you're giving your kids lots of green vegetables, they're getting some carbs, but they're getting the nutritional dense carbs. How would a child's metabolic sort of health be if they have less cornflakes, if they have less bread, pasta, rice? It's going to be great. It's going to be great because they're still going to be getting carbs through the greens. Right, one final thing we need to do before we go for tomorrow. I want you to, if you can, leave comments below. For tomorrow, the banana. It's a fruit. We're told to have 5 fruit and veg a day, but would it be a good choice, the banana, if we're trying to lose weight, or pre-diabetic, or have high blood sugar, or have high blood pressure, or have cardiovascular problems? Is a banana good for us? Does it turn into a lot of sugar inside the body, or would we be better off making other fruit choices? That's the question for tomorrow. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for so many questions. Please go spread the word about the program. Please, if you can, go and make a donation to Just Giving. Dr. Dan Maggs, thank you for a great show. Really insightful. As always, to my children for producing the show live. Thank you very much indeed. To Nick and Poppy for planning the shows. Thank you. And till tomorrow, stay safe.